Good evening, welcome along. It's time to sack Home Office staff. Home Office advisors looked at the Southport incident and used it as an opportunity to downplay Islamist extremism and class more people as far right. They spent 5 months writing a report into the counter-terror programme Prevent that ignored the fact that Islamists are responsible for 95% of terror-related deaths since 1999 and 88% of injuries. And they decided to class jihadi terror at the same level as the Movement for Sikh Independence and the Earth Liberation Front. At the same time, they wanted people who dare to mention two-tier policing or, hey, taxpayers' money spent on migrant hotels to be classed as far right. They said that Pakistani rape gangs were alleged grooming gangs, and they only mentioned them in the context of far-right people using them to whip up racial hatred. They are a disgrace and should be sacked for that alone, in my view. Shortly before GB News broke the leaked report, before anyone else, at 10 p.m. last night, the government got in touch to tell us that they would be rejecting the findings of said report. So, at minimum, those who wrote it should be sacked for doing bad work, shouldn't they? Like in any other business. Former Immigration Minister, now Shadow Justice Secretary Robert Jenrick, has called for them to be fired. But for me, the real problem is deeper. It's cultural. Andrew Griffiths was on GB News this morning alluding to it.
It's extremely disturbing that this Home Office report has reached this conclusion. The Home Secretary needs to publish this immediately so that we can all see for ourselves what and who it is that's saying these non-crime hate incidents, these attack and waste of police resources, something a Conservative Home Secretary stopped, it just keeps coming back. And there's clearly a cell within the Home Office that is not concerned about ordinary crime, ordinary policing, the sort of things that people are experiencing every day on our streets, mobile phones being stolen, burglaries not being followed up by police, in favour of this ideological approach to non-crime hate incidents.
So let's look at the circus going on behind the scenes. The Permanent Secretary of the Home Office is a diversity and faith champion. He can't even answer basic questions about illegal immigration.
Put foreign offenders aside and Albanians aside, just forget about those numbers. How many people travelling on small boats that's been refused asylum have been sent to a third country or back to their own country over the past 3 years?
I don't think we have. I
think we'll write to the committee with those numbers, Mr. Anderson.
That's staggering. That's actually staggering.
So
okay, then let's do it for the last year.
I don't have a number for non-Albanian, non-FNOs.
Perhaps they might be able to help you.
Let's do last week then.
Do we have any figures about anything?
No, by the way, they didn't. And let's look deeper behind the scenes. GB News has uncovered the Home Office Muslim network. Leaked documents show the group of over 700 civil servants say they aim to, quote, promote the recruitment, retention and progression of Muslim staff in the Home Office and, quote, influence policymakers so that policy is more inclusive of Muslim needs. A Home Office whistleblower told GB News having an Islamic lobby group inside the Home Office represents a serious threat to the government's aims in combating Islamic extremism and granting asylum to those fleeing Islamic countries over religious persecution. I mean, is it any wonder that backroom staff at the Home Office want to see people like you treated as far-right terror threats for pointing out cultural problems? Is it any wonder they don't seem to think that Pakistani rape gangs are a massive problem? Is it any wonder that despite the man who reviewed Prevent in 2023 saying they need to focus on Islamism and less on the far right, at the very first opportunity they got, they did the exact opposite? No, it's not a shock, is it? But it gets worse. Keir Starmer appeared to say that police officers should focus less on non-crime hate incidents in the wake of the Alison Pearson scandal a few months ago. But now it looks like the bit of the report that this government does want to adopt is, are you ready? Clamping down on more non-crime hate incidents. So the upshot of the Southport massacre, which prompted this review into Prevent, the upshot of that, need I remind everyone that 3 little girls were killed in the most brutal fashion by a depraved lunatic who had been reported to Prevent 3 times and was known to police. The upshot of that is for police to spend more time dealing with hurty words. In the past year, police have dealt with incidents like a rude word being spelt with alphabet cups in Tesco's and a member of the public being upset about the name of a dog. Two things here, two very important things. There is clearly, in my view, a rotten culture at the Home Office infested with diversity and inclusion nonsense, and they need to be sacked and cleared out. Secondly, have you ever known a government more out of touch than this? It wasn't hurty words that killed those little girls in Southport, Mr Starmer. Let's get thoughts from my panel this evening. We've got Conservative MP Esther McVey, GB News presenter Alex Armstrong and journalist Jonathan Liss. Esther, I'll start with you on this. The culture behind the scenes at the Home Office, to me, is quite staggering. It goes a long way, I think, to explaining why we ended up with this report, which Labour have rightly rejected, by the way. But how do we clear that out?
Well, I might say something here, might be a bit controversial to you, but I would say this is a minister and a Secretary of State sidestepping their responsibilities. So you, as a Secretary of State, if you're going to do a commission into something, a report, you set the boundaries, you steer the direction, you set the scope, and you set people off to find you the information. When it comes back to you, you can either say yay or nay, but to say people should be sacked, I would say that is Yvette Cooper's failings. That is the Secretaries of State and the ministers failing for asking the people who are working for them to go out and find that information. So I think they are actually, as I said, sidestepping responsibility. Let's go back to the old saying. What do they say? A bad workman blames their tools. And I'm afraid Yvette Cooper is that bad workman.
So we've had a report here, Alex, that was commissioned in the wake of the Southport atrocity. It's taken about 5 months to come to fruition, and it's just been rejected. So someone's got to go for it. In any other walk of life, you're running a business. If you set someone a task and they presented it with you after that length of time and it wasn't worth the paper it's written on, they'd have to go. So surely someone's got to go.
Well, in any normal business, they would be sacked. If this was me and my job, I'd be gone. But within the first day of that report coming out, my boss would go, what the hell is this? But the reality is, if you look at the rhetoric that's come out of the Prime Minister's mouth, of many other front-bench Labour politicians' mouths, this report matches that. You know, this determination that people who are talking out against two-tier policing is extremist or far-right. These are the sort of things that Keir Starmer believes in. So you can't... You almost can't...
The report.
Well, they have now, because I think they've realised that it's ridiculous.
You can't have it
but the reality is... Okay, but Jonathan, my point is they may be reflecting on their terrible use of language over the last few months, going, actually, maybe we need to tone it down. It was Keir Starmer's own report into the grooming gang failures in the CPS that said this kind of rhetoric got us into this position in the first place. It allowed these thousands or hundreds of girls to be groomed and raped and potentially murdered. So we're going back into that same fashion again with this sort of report. I'm glad to see it's been rejected, but, you know, we've got to have some accountability.
Well, if Esther's right, Jonathan, then ultimately the parameters of this report and the direction with which these staff at the Home Office and the advisers are told to go in is set by ministers and maybe the Prime Minister. So do you think that Yvette Cooper and Keir Starmer, even though they've rejected it now, are ultimately responsible for the contents of this report?
No, of course not. They commissioned a report. They never said that they were under any obligation to accept the findings, and they didn't accept the findings. I also don't think that we should be sort of firing people, threatening to fire people for producing conclusions that we disagree with. And I'm surprised that a free speech channel and an anti-cancel culture warrior such as yourself would be suggesting that
I don't like people doing bad work.
Fine, but this is not bad. It's not bad work, Patrick. It's not bad work. They've rejected it. Doesn't make it bad work.
Jonathan, it's bad work if the only time that you bring up the grooming gang scandal, when you conduct a report in which it puts a huge emphasis on misogyny and the manosphere as now a leading threat to extremism, and the only time you include Pakistani rape gangs in that is to call them alleged grooming gangs and say that that's a far-right issue to whip up hatred. That is bad work.
Patrick, I think that the idea of including misogyny or misogynistic-inspired crime as a hate crime is a perfectly sensible one. It's one that Labour actually agreed to and endorsed going into the election, and they agreed with by Lib Dems and Greens, among others. And that is the sort of thing, by the way, that you could have probably put at the door of the Southport killer. And so many of these men are attacking women and girls. And I think it's perfectly legitimate to say, wait, if it's not Islamism, it's not far right, is there a special category of hatred?
Rape gangs as misogyny, Jonathan.
Well, I mean, that is clearly misogynistic.
This is it. This is the thing.
One of the examples of the report is to make
Jonathan.
that.
Jonathan, the reality is it's inconvenient because the people at the Home Office, as Patrick said, it's full of DEI. And if they were to go out with this report and say, actually, we know there's a problem in certain communities, certain cultures with misogyny, which we would like to class as this level of extremism, particularly with the grooming gangs that we've seen over the last few years, I mean, decades, actually, should I say, that we actually need to classify it like this. They'll go, no, that's racist. Well, that's exactly the kind of rhetoric the Prime Minister has slapped down, and thankfully he has.
Let's be honest, because you've had quite a lot of experience of looking underneath the bonnet of how government works. Do you think that DEI or things like have been alluded to here about the fact that maybe there is this Home Office Muslim network, for example, right, do have an influence when it comes to reports like this?
So when I was made a Minister for Common Sense, a big chunk of work I did for 6 months, which was then completed in guidance, which is one thing, depoliticising the civil service, which shouldn't be. Well, the Labour Party laughed at it. Of course they should be. No, they shouldn't. The things that I got rid of on EDI to get value for money for the taxpayer, not have networks within a working day. Labour has now just reversed all of this. And that's why I say it is the Labour Party at the very top accepting certain behaviour, standards of work, but they are setting the direction. I would also say I've never seen such an ill-prepared group of people coming into government, lacking in ideas, and I will also say lacking in energy. And they've fallen back onto all of their left-wing biases, their EDIs, their whatever leftisms. And I'm afraid they are to blame, not the staff who are working for them.
I mean, there's going to be an increase, it seems anyway, in non-crime hate incidents. So hurty words. So, do we think that's a good thing? I mean, someone apparently last year, there was something like 4,000 investigations into hurty words last year by the police, which included someone being offended by something that someone had spelled out with alphabet cups at a Tesco. I mean, this is
the thing that I don't use the phrase hurty words. I think that can be, obviously on the one extreme. Some of these things can be very silly. On the other extreme, they can be things that are just short of hate crimes, which should potentially be logged. Look, I have said this to you before. Right. I'm yet to be convinced, and I'd be interested to hear the left-wing case for having non-crime hate incidents, because I kind of would think that either something is a crime or it isn't, and that it might be a lot of waste of police time. Probably the police love it because they're very easy to log. Having said that, they did come into effect after the Stephen Lawrence killing, because there was a fear that there were some people who were guilty of these things, and it was an escalation. So it was important to log these things before they became crimes. And that, I think, is there was a solid principle at stake. But I agree with you; it seems to have got too extreme. It's
also the opposite of what Keir Starmer appeared to say in the wake of the Alison Pearson issue. He was pretty clear in that, which he said basically the police should be doing the job that they're paid to do. We are bang out of time for this section, though.